In this presentation, we will examine communication styles, interdependence, and interpersonal skills. Not many people are familiar with the concept of interdependence. And really, what it boils down to is a win-win situation where two parties interact for whatever reason or purpose, and they determine that it's a good idea to work together because they see the value that can come from that. Whether it's a teaching situation, whether it's working in groups, whether it's any kind of activity to move forward and using the skills, talents, abilities, perceptions, and opinions of multiples to come to one conclusion. Different societies and even smaller ideas of culture, let's say a family or a circle of friends, really can have a big impact on how you perceive the world around you and why you feel comfortable or like to indulge in activities that are involving more than one person and not necessarily working independently. If you have the mindset or come from a family or a culture that has a more individualistic perception, then the emphasis is really on personal achievement and the idea of being self-reliant and not asking for help. It could even be stigmatized or frowned upon or seen as a weakness. Whereas collectivistic cultures are much more open to working with others, working with groups, confessing the idea that you might need help or assistance, or that you see the value in being able to achieve more when working with others because it opens your mind and expands your perception to different ways of thinking. One is not better than the other, but to just understand yourself a little more and be a little more aware of why you might behave the way you do or perceive the world the way you do is extremely helpful. So again, that individualistic culture really encourages autonomy and self-reliance, where the collectivistic culture really is on this sense of working in teams, working in groups, and working together as a collective. You can't get around talking about interdependence without talking about people skills. And everybody has a variety of people skills. Some are stronger than others. When you make the reference of, oh, wow, that guy has no people skills, that's not entirely accurate. They just might not be in accordance or parallel with your idea of important people skills. So again, there is that variety that we all bring to the table of these skills. Some are communication skills, some are behavior skills, some it might be body language or the type of language that we use. So people skills entail a variety of different things. Students tend to struggle a little bit with the idea of relationships, and we're talking about academic relationships mainly here, because they don't necessarily understand the benefit of creating and developing and fostering and nurturing those relationships that they have. Sometimes they get stuck in dependency or codependency, and they don't necessarily connect with other people. Sometimes they connect too much. So we have to recognize some of those relationships where the connections are too strong or not strong enough. Oftentimes they don't do a very good job in listening and really trying to make sure that they understand what another person is trying to communicate, but also really listening to what they're saying so they understand the message being shared. Also, we as human beings, have a sense of who we are, what we are, and where we fit in the world. And we fall into situations where we may judge other people that are different than us as inappropriate, wrong, bad. They don't fit in with what I think is normal, whatever that might be. So, this is the struggle that we have with the idea of interdependence and interpersonal skills. These can create a lot of friction. It's really all about building relationships. And that can be relationships with your peers, like your classmates. It can be with your instructors and making sure there's not an antagonistic relationship, making sure that even if you have a problem or an issue, that you feel comfortable going to them and asking questions in class during their office hours, or just really even disputing a grade, for example, and saying, I just have a difference of opinion. You're going to encounter situations in the classroom where you don't agree with your classmates' opinions about things. Can you do that respectfully? And can you have an engaging conversation even if you have extremely opposing viewpoints? As mentioned before, active listening is paramount to developing a strong relationship with someone. So it's extremely important to understand how to do that effectively, which means that you have to be focused and attentive. You want to ask questions and open-ended questions, not yes, no answers. You want to get those questions to really give you some details and specifics about what the person's trying to communicate. If you don't understand it or if you're not sure, get some clarification. Try to talk it back to them, rephrase it, paraphrase it back to them to show or demonstrate that you understand what they're saying. You want to also try to be perceptive of a feeling or an emotion that they might have. Notice that in the way that they communicate, not only in their tone of voice, but their body language. And then again, try to summarize back what they've said. If you can do these things, then that person really feels validated and heard and understood. There's a variety of different things that people have within their background that makes them the unique individuals that they are. And what we need to do to help those relationships and help the communication process is to be sensitive and be aware to those varieties in our backgrounds. We're living in a very PC world these days, and people get upset when we talk about sensitivity or awareness. But anything in an extreme is going to be potentially problematic. What we're talking about here is just recognizing that everyone isn't the same as you, doesn't have the same background, the same perception, the same opinions, and that if you actually truly have an intent to understand other people and to be understood yourself, that requires mutual respect for those differences. When we talk about the communication process, it's sometimes overcomplicated, but it's really quite simple. You see the sender on the left who has an idea. He has a light bulb, right? And this particular individual has a variety of past experiences, his culture, attitudes, values, knowledge, feelings that come into that idea and the message he's trying to send. He sends that message to a receiver who has all of those same things, but they might not be the same as the senders. He might have different past experiences, a different cultural background, attitudes, etc. So when you're talking about getting that message, it's really important to use those active listening techniques to provide that feedback to help with that communication process. Make sure that you decoded that message that was sent accurately and effectively. Interpersonal skills not only exist between you and your peers, but your family, your employer, your instructor, your classmates. So, again, you need to be aware of the messages that you're sending, not only through the words that you use, but in your body language, in your tone of voice, and your attitudes. We often misinterpret and misidentify different kinds of communications on a daily basis. Most people can relate to the idea of having gotten a text or an email that they thought meant one thing, but it really didn't, because it was either taken out of context or because you weren't able to actually see the person when they were communicating. You didn't see their body language, you didn't hear their tone of voice. So, what might have been meant as sarcasm or a joke was interpreted as an insult or something being aggressive or mean. So, it's really a very different world when we're talking about a sender's reality and their intended meaning than the receiver's reality and their perceived meaning when some of those things aren't there. So you have to take with a grain of salt sometimes when you're communicating through a means that doesn't have those extra cues and clues like tone of voice and body language, those nonverbals. It would be a beautiful thing if communication worked exactly the way that we intended, and that people were good listeners, and that we truly paid attention to what each other was saying, and we intended to do so so that we were really understanding where each person was coming from. But that doesn't happen all of the time. So you need to be aware and persistent if that's an issue that you have, whether you feel that you're consistently misunderstood or that you are constantly being criticized for not listening or understanding what other people are saying as well. If you get back to the very essentials of how human beings come to their different development stages, one theorist named Abraham Maslow had this hierarchy of needs. And one of those needs was something called love and belonging. And it's third on the rung. And it comes up uh, after the basic needs to safety needs and then love and belonging. And that's that whole idea of friendship and family and the idea of relationships overall. So you can see that even in our developmental stages, that whole idea of fostering relationships is pretty important. It's above the most basic needs that we have. So making sure that we're doing everything in our power to develop those concepts of interdependence and uh, meaningful relationships and good communication skills is extremely important. So you want to build those academic relationships as much as possible. Build a good relationship with your instructor, visit them during office hours, ask them questions during class and about your assignments. They're there to help you. Build that interdependence of their expertise and your learning process. Make use of the resources and departments and services that you have available to you. Talk with advising when you have questions about your major or program. Visit career services to learn more about your field. Talk with financial aid if you're having monetary or financial situations. Get help from the Academic Support Center, Library, and Writing Center. Work with your classmates. Have a conversation with them and build a buddy in each class. Work in teams and build study groups for difficult classes. And make sure that you're always aware and see the value of the diversity in your environment.